Hello, this is Congressman Brad Sherman, live from Washington, D.C. We're about to start our San Fernando Valley Town Hall meeting. Now, I want everyone to write down the following phone number just in case we get disconnected. That number is 855-920-0548. So if you get disconnected, you just dial back 855-920-0548. And that number will also be a number you can dial into for our next town hall, which will be April 6th. And that'll, again, be at 7 p.m. I'm here in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow morning we will hear from President Zelensky of the Ukraine. He will be participating with us virtually, but all members of the House and Senate will be listening to him. A few days later, I'll be flying back to the San Fernando Valley. I'll be swearing in the new officers of the United Chambers of Commerce, and then that's going to be followed by a debate among the mayoral candidates. They'll also look forward to seeing people at various Purim carnivals, and the Southland Realtors are meeting just a week after I get back for their event. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how this town hall operates. And I know a lot of you have been on before. You know that to get to my staff, you dial *3. If you have just a personal matter, say a problem with a federal agency, you can just talk to my fine constituent service staff. But most people who dial *3 will want to be put in the queue so that they can ask a question and be heard by thousands of Valley residents. We're going to be doing this for about an hour and 10 minutes. We have our prior town halls up on our webpage in case after an hour and 10 minutes you very much want more. And you can RSVP to our future town halls by going to bradsherman.house.gov. And you can RSVP for the future town hall. April 6th is the next one. And we'll be, you can submit a question in advance. Tonight I'll be answering some of the questions that have been submitted in advance, as well as those that are live from the floor. And even if you don't get a chance to ask your question tonight, and we do have usually many thousands of people on these calls, you'll be able to express your opinion because we'll do survey questions, and just by touching the keypad on your phone, you'll be able to tell myself, but the Valley where you stand. Now, I want to put in a pitch for our constituent service team. We have on the line Scott Abrams, who heads that team, Kimberly Caceres, who joined us just this year. And, of course, our constituent service office is located in America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. Of course, I represent the whole West and South San Fernando Valley. Imagine a federal agency makes a mistake. It could happen. It could affect you. You call Scott or Kimberly. They'll work hard. They solve your problem. And then I, Brad Sherman, take the credit. For that to work, you need their phone number, and that number is 818-501-9200, and they're available to you tonight if you dial *3, but they're even more available to you in business hours starting tomorrow morning. We will have a guest speaker in just a second, as we have had Dr. Lynn Goldman in the past. She is both a pediatrician and an epidemiologist, and I will introduce her in just a bit. I want to cover in the opening statement here something that's very local, and then something that is international. For the first time in 10 years, members of Congress have been able to get individual projects for their districts funded. And we were successful in getting 10 projects funded. One is for a community room, ranger station, public restrooms, a lot of other things. That's part of the 30-acre project that will also include stadium and bleacher seating, and landscaping, and and multi-purpose sports fields, which are so important. I certainly identify with fathers who need to go to that AYSO game that starts at 7:00 because there aren't enough sports fields to have the games at reasonable times. So this will all be at in a 30-acre area just west of the existing Sepulveda Basin Sports Complex. We're able to secure $2 million for an organization that I have just a lot of respect for, and that is Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission. They are they're cost effective, they're kind, and I don't know a private group that does more for the homeless and the unhoused in the San Fernando Valley. $1 million for a group called Baby to Baby that helps women without means and the unhoused women who have very young children, diapers, strollers. We were able to secure $1 million for El Proyecto del Barrio for their clinic in Winnetka that will now have 6 additional dental exam rooms and 6 additional women's specialty examination rooms. We were able to secure money for Cal State Northridge to look at addressing the long-term mental health needs of Valley children affected by the COVID and the lockdowns. About $500,000 for Labor Community Services, which distributes food, helps with emergency rental payments. We were able to get a $250,000 to improve Warner Center Park, and a lot of you know I enjoy the Sunday concerts that are held there in the summer, and this will make the concert experience, I think, a lot more enjoyable as we improve the park and the stage. We're able to get money for computer labs for a group called New Directions for Youth, which teaches at-risk youth how to deal with computers and even how to fix them. Tree People is going to be planting, and it's not just planting the trees; it's caring for the trees for their first 3 years, particularly in those areas that were scarred by the Aliso Canyon fire and the Cessnon fire. And then finally, we're able to get some money for the Valley Economic Alliance to provide technical training for businesses around the San Fernando Valley. So there's the very local. The very international is obviously Ukraine. We see the heart-wrenching stories. We should keep in mind that there are also heart-wrenching stories that are not put on your television set from other areas of the world, Yemen, Syria, and most significantly the Tigray region of Ethiopia. And in those areas there has actually been more human suffering. But what makes Ukraine different is it's not just a humanitarian disaster. It is also an attack on the international world order. If you look at the history of the 20th century and prior centuries, the great wars were fought over one country going over its borders and trying to conquer another. And that really hasn't happened this century. As far as annexing or taking over the half or all of the territory of a clearly independent country, that pretty much hasn't happened since World War II, except with Russia taking certain regions of the country of Georgia and certain regions that they had taken in 2014 of Ukraine. And now it appears they're trying to seize all of Ukraine. I don't think they'll be successful, but that appears to be their preferred outcome. There's been a lot of analogies to World War II. I think we'll learn more by studying the history of World War I, which was a world war that broke out when no one country wanted a long world war. And I don't think Russia wants a world war. I know we don't either. But the history of 1914 shows you that this can happen. I've been a member of the Ukraine caucus for 10, 15 years. And as a group and as an individual, I've been pressing to provide the defense material that Ukraine needs long before Ukraine was in the headlines. And they got an awful lot from us before this year, and they are using it spectacularly well. As far the controversy comes with the no-fly zone proposal, and there you've got the idea of Americans shooting at Russians, whether on the ground or in the air, is particularly scary. We did not see that in the wars of the 20th century, even though we were backing one side and they were backing the other. We did not shoot at Russians in Korea, in Vietnam, and in the Afghan War of the 1980s, where Russia was fighting insurgents armed by the United States. No-fly zone sounds good, except to protect your pilots. It's not enough to just fly over Ukraine. You have to destroy the anti-aircraft systems that Russia has. And those systems are located in Russia and in Belarus. So for our pilots to be safe in a no-fly zone, they would have to conduct bombing raids against Russia, against Belarus. And that would bring us far closer to nuclear war than we've been ever. So it's important that we avoid that. I think we'll get a question about the newest controversy on that, and that is whether certain MiG aircraft, Soviet-built aircraft owned by Poland, can be transferred to Ukraine. But I'm sure we'll get questions on Ukraine. I'm sure we'll get questions on a host of other subjects. But right now I want to turn it over to our guest, Dr. Lynn Goldman, as I said, pediatrician and epidemiologist, member of the National Academy of Sciences, master's in public health, of course a medical degree, and one of the leaders of public health. And she'll tell us a little bit about where we stand with COVID. And I hope, Lynn, that you can cover vaccinations for those age 6 and younger, and when booster shots, there's a proposal to give a 4th shot to those who are over age 65. And it looks like Pfizer is working on a booster shot for the fall that should be particularly designed to deal with Omicron and Delta. So I hope you can tell us about the vaccinations, but about everything else, Dr. Goldman.
Certainly, and thank you so much for having me at your town hall meeting tonight. So things are, as you know, looking up in the U.S. right now. We've done a very good job in the last few weeks with bringing down the rates of the COVID, and we're in what I would call a lull in terms of the transmission being fairly low across all of our country. We of course could have more surges, which is why I think of this as a lull and not an actual end of the pandemic, but it feels like the end in some ways, and it is definitely a time when we can all be somewhat more relaxed, a little less vigilant, and have a little bit more fun with being able to get together without having to worry so much about distancing and masking and all of that. But at the same time, it's also a time when we need to be preparing for what is very likely to be the next version of COVID that as it comes through, of course, which right now we have no idea what it will look like. And that means building up our capacity to do testing. Now we have good treatments. We need to have enough of those pills around. I happen to like the new strategy that's been rolled out by the Biden administration called Test to Treat, where you get a rapid test, and if it's positive, you can start a treatment right away. I think that's a really good idea. And above all, to immunize, and especially the people who haven't yet had any immunizations. And it's a little bit daunting to realize that in LA County, there's still about 30% of people who are not immunized and who are still, therefore, very susceptible to COVID. As you said, though, there's some progress being made also in improving our approach to immunization. One problem still is the lack of an approved or even authorized vaccine for children age 5 and below. And those vaccines have been tested, but it seems like there may be some challenges with coming up with the right dose for very young children. You want a dose that is potent enough to create the immune response, but you don't want a dose that creates some of the adverse side effects, and especially given that children are at lower risk for some of the worst side effects of COVID itself, that there's been a lot of caution about that. And so the two companies that make the mRNA vaccine have taken completely different approaches to developing those vaccines for little kids. Pfizer, which already has some vaccines for children over the age of 6, their vaccines have been found, especially in the age 6 to 11 year band, the kids receiving Pfizer didn't have as effective immunity during the last wave of COVID as we would have liked to have seen. And Pfizer was using a very low dose and now has developed a vaccine that's even lower dose for the children under the age of 5. Meanwhile, Moderna is coming forth with data for the FDA to review with a vaccine for younger kids that's somewhat more potent, which they say is also very safe. So it remains to be seen how this is all going to play out. These vaccines, the companies have to go to the FDA, and they'll undergo strict safety review by the FDA, and then they have to be reviewed by the Centers for Disease Control. But I think that there's reason to hope that within the next few months, at least one of those products, if not both of them, will be available for children under the age of 5, and that we'll be able to get things sorted out on how to have an effective vaccine for the older kids. You mentioned the issue of the fourth shot, basically the second booster, and that is a proposal that Pfizer is putting in front of the Food and Drug Administration right now. There is a lot of data that indicates that over time the vaccines wane in their effectiveness. And so I'm beginning to be of the opinion that it's really not a matter of whether we're going to get boosters. It's more of a matter of when that's going to be happening and which boosters we will receive. Will it be the same vaccine that we've already received? Or, as you mentioned, will it be a different one that's been tweaked to be more effective against the Delta and Omicron variants? Or maybe it will be both. We might have to do both. But this is a time definitely to catch up on vaccines, and especially for people who aren't yet vaccinated to go and get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's now open it up to questions from the floor, and please tell me your name and what town you live in and what your question is.
Okay, Congressman, we have Madeline who has a question about Ukraine. Madeline, you are on now.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I've been very consumed with the situation in Ukraine, and I know you have too, Representative Sherman. I've been calling very frequently. I'm wondering what your thinking is, and your feelings, actually, more your feelings rather than your thinking, about giving Zelensky and the Ukrainians, either the MiGs or other ways to close the skies, as they say, because they are being really bombarded, and these are targeting civilians. I don't know how this is tolerable, but it's very traumatizing, even just to watch it, and I can only imagine what the people are going through over there. So we have to stop the trauma, and we have to stop the bombing, and we have to stop dictators doing these kinds of things. But that's my opinion. I want to know how you're feeling about it.
I think most people agree with you. I certainly feel that we have to do everything we can under difficult circumstances to help Ukraine, and especially deal with high altitude aircraft. Now, we have given them and are rushing to them as much as we can the missiles to deal with armor and tanks and most aircraft, that is to say those flying at lower medium altitudes. But there's the high altitudes. And the discussion is should Poland transfer Soviet-era MiGs to them? That raises questions about first whether those would be effective. If there's dogfights in the sky, the Russian Air Force is much larger than Ukraine and has some planes that are more advanced than the Ukrainians can fly. So what's more likely to protect Ukraine are anti-aircraft missile systems. And that's what we need to transfer. One problem we have is that we don't have as many of them in our own stockpile as we would like. The other problem that arose with Poland's offer is that Poland was willing to transfer the planes and expect that the United States would give them for free much better planes, and that was certainly in the cards. But they got skittish over the issue of how to transfer the planes. With regard to anything that can be trucked into the Ukraine, it's being trucked in. And so, a case of rifles goes in. It's in Ukraine. A day later, they open the box and they pass out the rifles. And so the war is in Ukraine. If instead a plane takes off from Poland, it's ready to fight as it flies over the border. And if a plane were to take off from Poland and bomb Russians on the ground or engage with Russians in the sky, that is, in effect, an air raid emanating from Poland. So Poland said, well, we'll transfer the planes not in the direction of Ukraine, but in the other direction, west to Germany, and we'll have the United States figure this one out, and we have not figured it out. I do not think that these planes can be trucked in. I don't think they can be disassembled. And as I said, our military experts have said that planes are not that useful for Ukraine because they're going to get shot down. And that what's useful is, and what has been most useful to Ukraine are the shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, chiefly the Stinger. So we'll see how this develops. Another advantage of the Stinger is we hope Ukraine wins the conventional stage of this war, and they are holding their own. And every day that the Russians don't win, they're winning. But what's daunting for Putin is that even if he can get his tanks into the middle of Kiev, he's then going to have to occupy Ukraine. And there is Stingers are extremely effective for guerrilla operations. We saw that in Afghanistan, both against us, but especially against the Soviets in the 1980s. And so I think that Putin needs an off-ramp. We may see a negotiated settlement in the next week. Zelensky has already said, okay, Ukraine won't join NATO. That may be enough of a concession so that Putin can announce victory and leave, which is what we want him to do. Now, the fact is, Ukraine wasn't going to join NATO this decade, next decade. And the reason for that is Ukraine's territory, especially the Crimea, also areas of the eastern Donbass, have been occupied by Russia since 2014. If Ukraine joins NATO on Monday, we're at war with Russia on Tuesday. The reason for that is that we have to treat the occupation of Ukrainian territory as the same as occupying our territory if Ukraine were part of NATO, which is why we're not. NATO membership isn't in the cards until that's resolved. So I don't think Ukraine is going to be joining NATO. If we can go back to where we were at the beginning of this year, it'll be a huge step forward for Ukrainian people and for the peace of the world. Putin deserves to be humiliated and defeated. But if we can restore peace and restore Ukrainian control of all the territory they controlled 4 weeks ago, I think that's a major step forward. And I think Putin is going to be paying a big price for this economically. And I'll point out, Madeline, that your question was similar to that of Peter Gold of West Hills, who submitted his question in advance. I was going to answer his. I just did, and I answered yours as well. Let's take another question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, this one is likely for the doctor. Robert in Sherman Oaks, question about vaccines. Robert, you are on now.
Hi there. Hi, doctor. I just had a quick question about the percentage of unvaccinated people in Los Angeles. I was wondering if you had at your fingertips that 30%, how much of that 30% is in the pediatric population? That's my question. Thank you.
I can't give you an exact number, but you're raising a good point. A fair number of them are in the pediatric population. Mostly people in the pediatric population who have approved vaccines that they could be taking, but who have not yet been immunized. I would also say that a fair number of them, though, are older people, people of all ages who are still hesitant about receiving the vaccinations, and even some of them are people who actually have known to be immunocompromised. And I've spoken with many people who, on the basis of being immunocompromised, are more afraid of the vaccine than getting COVID, and to which I have to say that it is far safer to get the vaccine. There is no evidence that the vaccine harms people who are immunocompromised, and there's a lot of evidence that COVID is extremely dangerous to them. But thank you, you're right, some of them are kids.
Now let's do a survey question. The question is, do you approve President Biden's handling of the Ukraine crisis so far? Press 1 if you approve of how President Biden is handling the crisis. Press 2 if you disapprove, and 3 if you're unsure or somewhere in the middle. We'll have those results for you. And now let's go on to another question.
Okay, Congressman, we have a call from Jeremy in Encino. Jeremy, you are on now.
Hello, Congressman Sherman.
Hello, Jeremy.
Are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Sherman. Funny enough, I actually think we go to the same temple. But what do you call it? I have a question about the military. To be specific, my question is, hold up, I had it written down somewhere. Where was it? Here we go, I have it. Okay. Here's my question. Since we know that the military is the biggest contributor to fossil fuel emissions in the country, and that most of the oil we produce domestically is exported or sent to the military, what will you do to decrease both emissions and the cost of oil? We know it's possible to do, but so far no one's stepped up to do it. Why is that?
I'm not sure I heard every word of your question. You're talking about the price of oil and also the amount used by the military and the emissions that come from the military?
That would be correct. The military is the biggest contributor to fossil fuel emissions in the country. Most of the oil we produce domestically is exported.
Well, You're cutting in and out, but I'll address this. Whether the military is largest kind of depends upon how you classify things. Certainly, the military is the biggest institution in the country. On the other hand, obviously, emissions from autos, emissions from power plants nationwide dwarf the military. There is a real attention to reducing emissions from the military, but as long as our military remains very large, and this gets into the foreign policy aspects, as long as it's the biggest institution of the country, it will certainly be it'll be the biggest source of emissions. As to the price of oil, a lot of Democrat versus Republican sniping is about the Democrats not allowing oil to be produced in certain environmentally sensitive ways. I'd say what you have to understand is that the price of oil is a worldwide price. So you could say, well, gee, if we could just drill off Santa Barbara and grab that oil for the Southern California, then our prices would go down. It doesn't work that way. The amount that somebody is going to get for their oil is reflective of the world price. And the United States is energy independent. We export oil, we import oil, roughly the same amount. But the price that we in California pay for Texas oil doesn't matter if Texas produces 10% more oil or 10% less oil. It's a world price. Now, the sanctions against Putin are designed to prevent him from being able to sell oil, if to the extent they're effective. That takes 4 million barrels a day off the world supply. They're right now over half effective. Putin's people are running around now trying to figure out how to get around these sanctions, but now they're more than half their oil is off the world market. The Saudis have refused to pump more oil, even knowing that the Russian oil is off the market. That decision shows that they've forgotten how much we saved them. For example, in the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein not only conquered Kuwait, but was ready to conquer the part of Saudi Arabia that has all the oil, which is the part kind of close to Kuwait. The Saudis want to be neutral between those who care about between Putin and his victims, and that's not an appropriate response from a country that has time and again called upon the United States to protect its security. The final thing, and again, this goes back to U.S. levels of production. What Democrats have been known for is pushing for energy conservation, fuel efficiency standards, alternative energy, and these have dramatically reduced what would otherwise be the price of oil and the consumption of oil. When I first got, my first car got about 8 miles to the gallon. We have almost doubled fuel economy over the last 30, 35 years. And that's because people who care about the environment have been pushing. And not to mention the alternative energy, the conservation. And hopefully we'll see a mass transit system that gets better in Los Angeles. So we do need to reduce the amount of fuel we use, both in general and in the and for the military. Kind of a separate foreign policy issue is, should the United States play this enormous role that we play in world foreign policy? And when you see us being able to step forward and help Ukraine, it argues for the big role that we play. But we play an oversized role in the military and national security arena in the world. We have avoided a world war after we fought two world wars in 2 generations, or in 1 generation, 1.5 generations apart. And so I'm sure we'll get some more foreign policy questions. And the one thing underlying our foreign policy questions is, should the United States play this enormous role in working for world security? Let's see the answers on that survey question. Biden's handling of Ukraine: 64% of you approve, 19% disapprove, 17% are unsure. That's more unsure than we typically get on questions asking whether you approve or disapprove of a president, and that stands to reason. This crisis has been going on for 3 weeks, and we're going to have to see how it develops. At this point, I'll go to a second survey question. Here's one that I'm personally interested in. With COVID restrictions easing in Los Angeles this summer, do you think we should emphasize having telephone town halls like this one, or switch back to the in-person town halls? And if you haven't been to a Sherman in-person town hall, it'd be very hard to enforce any kind of mask mandate or anything like that. It can get a bit rowdy. There are people in our valley that support Donald Trump, and people that are angered by him. So I'll ask you to push 1 if you think we should emphasize telephone town halls. Press 2 if we should emphasize in-person town halls, and 3 if you're unsure. Let's go to another question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman Gregory in Sherman Oaks has a question about the bill the Senate just passed today to make daylight savings year-round.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Greg, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear
Good.
me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. The so-called Sunshine Protection Act, passed today by the U.S. Senate and now awaiting House action, which, if it passes, will put all of us and everything we do on year-round daylight saving time, is really a terrible piece of legislation. The best way to eliminate the twice-a-year obnoxious time change, I think, very intensely, is to move to year-round standard time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for a whole range of quality of life, health, equity, and environmental reasons. For example, year-round daylight savings time will definitely not help America reduce oil use, will not help decarbonization. Everything we do, from getting up to going to school to going to work to finally, maybe at the end of the day, having a little bit of social time, is all going to be made much more stressful. I think this act should be called the Make Everything Happen Earlier Act. Especially bad for students, especially bad for people who use public transit and wait for buses. I know it's going to be bad for me. A lot of people are not functioning best during the morning. Half of us function better later in the day. If we just have standard time, which is also aligned with the rotation of the Earth, we can also implement all of the many flexible provisions that we need, I think, to not just reduce oil, but to allow everybody to live a good life. Flex time.
Greg, you obviously feel very, very strongly, and I do want to take a look at this bill coming from the Senate. I think if we do either of them year-round, we'll eventually do what we want to do when we do it. That is to say, if 8 a.m. is always 8 a.m., and we as a society don't want to be at work at 8 a.m., so employers will specify that we're to be at work at 9 a.m. I agree with you. The change is just a problem, and as you know, I've got a job where I live in 2 time zones, and so it's I find it a problem to change time zones, and changing from daylight to standard is the same thing. Only everybody has to do it, not just those of us who are on a plane. Um, the original adoption of daylight saving time was with a theory that it would reduce energy usage, and there have been studies on that say it does, or that say it doesn't. As to whether life is better with daylight versus standard, I'm happy in February. I'm happy in May. Obviously, May is better in that there's more. There's more total sunshine, but that's a matter of the Earth circling the sun. That's not a matter of anything we can do with the clocks. So it's hard to compare the two. But so I think a lot of people object to the change, and we'll have to see, because I mean, regardless of whether you have daylight or standard time, there are schools in this country that start at 7 a.m. There are schools in this country that start at 9 a.m. And I hope educators will pick the time, knowing that the Earth is involved and that it's the real time of when the sun rises and sets, that allows students to learn best. And I count on employers to do the same thing. But the daylight saving time has been talked about kind of continuously since World War I, and now that the Senate has sent this bill to us, I look forward to studying it. Let's do another survey question here. Should we impose sanctions on Russia even if it raises oil and gasoline prices worldwide? 1, yes, sanction Russia. 2, no, if it's going to raise oil prices. 3, unsure. And we'll get those answers back to you. And I'm going to take one of the RSVP questions. You can submit a question in writing by going to bradsherman.house.gov/townhall. And Deborah Llewellyn of Sherman Oaks did just that. And she asks, thank you for sending a letter to Secretary Buttigieg about appointing a new FAA administrator who will meaningfully address jet noise and pollution from the FAA next-gen flight path changes. Will you please also schedule a meeting as soon as possible with Secretary Buttigieg to educate him? The airline industry has dominated the FAA. The airline industry focuses on getting from here to there on time and safely, and with no concern for the effect they're having on people on the ground. We have out here a Quiet Skies Caucus, which is a group of about 40 or 50 of us who are focused on reducing noise. It's not just a problem for the San Fernando Valley. It's a problem in a lot of areas. And when I say Quiet Skies Caucus, I know there are groups in L.A. with different names, and one of them is Quiet Skies. The Quiet Skies Caucus is, it's a nice name, but it's not affiliated with any of the groups in Los Angeles. Perhaps fortunately, the FAA administrator, Steve Dixon, is leaving. This is good. He, in one respect at least, he has been very unresponsive on noise issues. And so now is our time to try to get someone appointed to that job who's not just focused on air transportation, but is also focused on the millions of Americans who are on the ground. Certainly, if you live in Studio City and much of Sherman Oaks, etc., you realize how the so-called Metroplex system has shifted where the planes fly, put them over hills that where the sound reverberates and have continued the absurd idea that planes that go out of Burbank have to go over the southeast San Fernando Valley. They don't. They could fly due south. They could fly southeast. They don't have to hook southwest, but they would actually have to spend some time designing the flight patterns for LA County and its various airports in order to not afflict the southeast valley with all of the Burbank noise. A couple other things in the area. I've, of course, joined with my colleagues in introducing the REST Act, the Restore Everyone's Sleep Tonight Act, so that local airports will have the right to have curfews, just as Adam Schiff and I had legislation that reasonably close to passing to give Burbank and Van Nuys airports the right to have a curfew. What you don't realize is the airport, even the air transportation system is so dominated by the airlines that even the airports who own the airport are not allowed to have curfews under federal law, with some exceptions. We did have one of those exceptions apply to Van Nuys, and that's why we have a curfew, although there are public safety flights and some other flights that happen late at night. And I could go on and on about the FAA and its insensitivity on noise. One of the more ridiculous things the FAA does is they say, well, here in the valley, the most noisy plane doesn't meet our standards as being extremely noisy, while ignoring the fact that at that location you may have 100 different events a day. And so the FAA has got to look not only at what's the noise level, but also how frequently residents are exposed to that noise. We have a answer. Should we continue with telephone town halls or the in-person? 76% telephone town halls, 15% in-person, 9% not sure. Let's take another question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, we have Richard in Woodland Hills. Richard, you're on now.
Okay. Yes, hello, Congressman. I had a question. Immigration from Ukraine into the U.S. So the countries in Europe are currently accepting, multiple millions of refugees into their countries, and I don't think that the United States has been doing that. I wanted to ask. Some people have family members who have been waiting for many years to come into the United States for a green card, and they've been through all the processing and have been approved to come to the United States, but there's a long queue. It can be 10 years, and now some of those people from Ukraine are in refugee camps in Europe, and they have nobody to take care of them because their family members are in the United States. What is your opinion on allowing an expedited admission process for those people to come immediately to the United States?
We've got 2.5 million refugees, but this is a different kind of refugee. These are people who expect to go back to Ukraine. These are situations a male between the ages of 18 and 60 isn't allowed to leave Ukraine. And so these are not complete families. These are people who want to stay close and go back. These are not people who want to come to a different continent, leaving the male members of their family in Ukraine, and they want to move here. So this is a different kind of refugee, and many of the Ukrainian refugees are being offered places in Italy and Germany, and they say, no, we want to stay in Poland. We want to stay close. We're going back soon. Now, if somebody has, we ought to have a rule to allow those with family members here in the United States to come. And I'm sure that if, God forbid, this is a permanent exodus from the Ukraine, that America will step forward and take a share of refugees. But people from the Ukraine want to live in the Ukraine and expect that they'll be going back there in weeks or months. And I think that needs to be our goal. As to if we're going to accept refugees from Ukraine, and we are, we should be accepting those with family members in the United States, first and foremost. But I in touch with those on the ground in Poland, and I don't think that these 2.5 million people want to live outside their country, and I don't think to. I think do we have some survey results? We will soon have some survey results. Let's take let's do. I guess we have just one more survey question, so we might as well get it out of the way here. In response to rising gas prices, and this was true even before the invasion of Ukraine, there have been calls on Congress to create a gas tax holiday, which would take 18 cents of tax off the cost of each gallon until January of 2023. Now, the trust fund that builds our roads would then need to get money from the general fund, from income tax revenues, because it would not be receiving money from the gas tax if we suspended the gas tax, the federal gas tax. Keep in mind there's a larger state gas tax, but that's outside the purview of our federal discussion here. So if you think we should suspend the 18-cent federal gas tax for the rest of the year, press 1. If no, press 2. And if unsure, press 3. And I realize 18 cents is a small fraction of what we're paying at the pump. Okay, should we sanction Russia even if it raises oil prices worldwide? Yes, 81%, no, 10%, unsure, 9%. Those are the results. Let's take another question from the floor. Maybe we have one for Dr. Goldman.
In fact, we do. Susan from Sherman Oaks, you're on now.
Hi there. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Congressman Sherman and Dr. Goldman, for being here tonight. Dr. Goldman, I have a question for you. I've been reading so much about Novavax. It's a protein-based vaccine. And I just read an article this morning in Yahoo News that said that the FDA is slow walking the approval process for Novavax, and I just can't understand why. Right now we have 65% of all Americans vaccinated, and we need that to be much greater. And we need to vaccinate children. I'm sure you can appreciate that, being a pediatrician. And Novavax has a really strong track record. They did a big study with children back in August of 2021, and it seemed to have a good efficacy with no serious side effects. It also has no serious side effects for adults, and I have several friends who are on the fence about getting a vaccine because of health issues, and their doctors are actually telling them if they can wait for Novavax, to wait for Novavax, especially anything having to do with heart issues. So I'm hoping that we can raise awareness about Novavax and the need for it. They finalized their approval application on January 31st to the FDA, and it took the FDA 21 days or less to grant Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson emergency use approval. And so far it's been 45 days, and they're not even setting a meeting with Novavax. So I'm just so curious as to why we seem to have a vaccine. Oh, it's approved in 177 other countries, including Canada, the EU, Australia, New Zealand. the UK, and so I'm just so
Let's
curious
hear the doctor's answer.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you for the question, because I think a lot of people are concerned about this and wondering why it's taking so long for the FDA to bring the Novavax to its advisory committee. See, the process that FDA uses is that the companies submit a big pile of information, including all the studies that they've done and the statistics and everything, and then their expert reviewers review that, and when they're satisfied that they have what would be a possible strong case for approval, they bring it to their advisory committee. And I don't think anybody knows, except people inside FDA and perhaps inside the company that makes Novavax, what these delays have been about. Because the FDA doesn't really reveal very much about what its procedures are until they go to the advisory committee, and then they, at the really the very last minute, right before these meetings, they will share all of their analyses. And so there are many theories. One is that it doesn't seem urgent as it did earlier on in the pandemic when there was no vaccine at all. But it's also possible, and I've seen this a lot, and actually at one point in my career I was a regulator, and there can be a tug of war between a company and the regulator if FDA has data, a way that they want to look at the information and the company doesn't agree. And that kind of thing could be going on behind the scenes, but we don't really know. But I think you're making a good point. It would be another option, and I think that we probably need it. We are using it in a number of countries across the world. I would say I wouldn't wait for it. I'd go ahead and get a vaccine now, probably one of the mRNA, but it could be the J&J vaccine. And then, one could switch over to Novavax later, since it seems like we're going to have boosters and periodically change vaccines over time. But I wouldn't wait for it because I can't fathom why it is that there is a delay. But thank you for the question.
And Susan, you've shown some real persistence. You were also one of the written questions I was going to call on or answer, or actually have Dr. Goldman answer, but you also asked it orally. Speaking of written questions, we've got one for me from Robert Shellhorn of Woodland Hills. He says, you're a fraud who has supported anti-American, anti-energy independence, and the sick welfare state. Your party believes in taxing and punishing success while subsidizing stupidity and failure. You are an anti-Constitution sicko who should go back to Russia! ! I will go. I am going back to the San Fernando Valley this weekend. As to energy independence, Democrats have pushed for conservation, particularly for mileage standards, that have done more for making us energy independent than two Texases and a North Dakota. As I mentioned before, we're getting twice the mileage per gallon on average almost as we were 30 years ago. That being said, we are producing more oil in this country today than we did when Biden took office, and are on target to produce more oil in the United States in 2023 than has ever been produced in the United States in history. But the price we pay is going to be dependent upon the world price, and that's why hopefully we can solve the Ukraine problem, and then Russia's oil could be purchased, and hopefully we'll see greater production out of Saudi Arabia and lower that world price. I've answered a lot of Robert's questions, and now we'll give a report on the last question here, survey question. Should we suspend the federal gas tax? 50% say yes, 32% say no, and 18% are unsure. Let's take a question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, we have a question from Gary from West Hills. Gary, you are on right now.
Hey, Gary.
Hi, thank you, Congressman, for taking my question. You've been touched on this a number of times, so I'm going to raise a little sharper point on it. My basic question was, we don't want to buy oil from Venezuela or Russia, and we want lower gas prices. So I've heard what you said, and I respect that. I'm curious about the Keystone Pipeline and the effect that may have had, and on both. My understanding is that it was something that affected Canada as well. And if we're not using a pipeline, doesn't that mean that we're using more energy to truck that oil where it needs to go? And should we reconsider closing the shutting down of the Keystone Pipeline?
Well, we do have to evaluate the Keystone Pipeline. Keep in mind that this is very heavy, hard to refine oil that's not economic under some circumstances, and that poses more of an environmental problem than lighter oils. Trump approved the project in 2017, and they didn't build it. Democrats have been a bit more skeptical because these tar sands oils are tougher for the environment than other lighter oils. But we also have to weigh the environmental concern with the geopolitical as well. And when one looks at the additional oil that could come online that isn't online today, it's Saudi Arabia, not always a great upholder of human rights. And then it goes downhill from there, Iran, Venezuela, Russia. So we could take a look at this. The fact is that the Canadians do get some of that tar sands oil into the United States by rail, and that is not as good for the environment as a pipeline, if that pipeline is built safely and built in the right place. And there are controversies not only about the Keystone Pipeline in concept, but the exact route that it was scheduled to build. So I do think that the Biden administration will be looking at this. I'll be looking at it. It's a very small part of world oil production. I will also keep in mind that environmentalists tend to focus on production issues in Canada, the United States, and North America. In terms of global warming, if you don't produce oil in North Dakota and you instead produce it in Saudi Arabia, you really can't blame the Saudis for the carbon if that oil is going to be burned here in the United States. It's not the place where the oil comes from; it's the place where it's used that literally, and I think orally, is where the carbon pollution is coming from. And it's incumbent upon us to burn as little fossil fuels here in the United States as possible, which is a different thing than how much we produce. Producing less but burning more is much worse for the environment. So we can take a look at that, but we really need to look at conservation, alternative energy, and a carbon neutral footprint being achieved sooner. And every barrel that we don't need to burn is not just good for the environment, but it's good economically, since low oil prices may not be so great in Texas and North Dakota, but I don't represent Texas or North Dakota. Certainly better from California. And lower oil prices, I think, in general help the U.S. economy. They certainly help on the inflation issue. And so we've got a very strong interest in what has been the number one contribution to energy independence, which is conservation and alternative energy. But also, as I pointed out, we're going to produce more oil in the United States in 2023 than we ever had in history. I believe we have time for maybe one, maybe two additional questions. Let's see if we can get into if they're easy questions.
Okay, Congressman. Brian from Sherman Oaks. Brian, you are on now.
Good evening, Congressman. Thanks for holding these town halls. They're very much appreciated.
Thank you.
The Payment Choice Act, which is H.R. 4395 for anybody who wants to look it up, it's a short bill. It would require businesses to accept cash for most transactions. This bill has a number of co-sponsors. It has Democratic and Republican co-sponsors. As I'm sure you're aware, there are many people in the community who don't have debit or credit cards. Debit card requires a bank account. Many people are not able to maintain bank accounts for various reasons. Credit card requires credit, requires access to credit. And as a result, the businesses that don't accept cash are in effect discriminating against individuals who don't have access to those cards. Businesses everywhere from Dodger Stadium to, local restaurants and small businesses have increasingly adopted no cash policies in the wake of the pandemic, ostensibly as a public health measure, although the doctor could probably back up that it's really not a public health measure. The virus is not being transmitted on cash. Anyway, so the question is, would you be willing to co-sponsor this legislation to help to push to get it passed? And if not, why not? And I appreciate your attention to this. And I'll note that there are 2 states that have passed bills in the same vein, New Jersey and I think Massachusetts. And there is a bill pending in the California state legislature on this topic. But I really think a federal law, given the essentially civil rights issue that's at issue here, and also, by the way, a privacy issue. People have the right to to buy a Diet Coke without it being tracked by their credit card issuer or their or particular businesses. Anyway, I think a federal law is appropriate. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Well, I will take a look at it. I think the vast majority of businesses should accept cash for the reasons you bring up. The only reluctance I have is this idea, can I be sure that that's 100% of the businesses? Are there any unique circumstances where this or that business can best, it's just not in a position to accept cash? And so I need to hear from just every kind of business. There are transit systems that, on the one hand, you can use cash to buy the card, but then they want the card. One wonders, and this is more of a subway thing than a bus thing, so it's more applicable to other parts of the country. That how is that system going to work? And I don't know how this bill would apply to a business that said, yes, you can give us cash, but then we give you a card, and then you're going to use the card to enter our subway system, et cetera. So the vast majority of businesses should accept cash, and whether it should be one-size-fits-all mandate would require me to both look at the states that you brought up. Maybe they prove that either there's some way of making exceptions or that no exceptions are necessary. So I'd want to see how it's working in those states. I want to hear from a whole variety of businesses. But you're right, not everybody has a debit or credit card. I think that's going to need to be our last question, but that is not the last part of our communication, because when pretty soon you'll hear a tone. First, I want to thank Dr. Lynn Goldman for joining us for what must be the 12th or 15th time. You'll hear voicemail system just as soon as I conclude here. Please leave your email address, even if I already have it, because I won't be allowed to send you emails in the future unless I get your email from the email directly from you. If you want to know when our next town hall is, it's April 6th, 7 p.m., and you can RSVP in advance, bradsherman.house.gov. And the voicemail system will allow you not only to leave your email address, but leave whatever comment or question you have. I'm not going to listen tonight, but I will listen tomorrow, and we'll be back in touch with you if you leave a question in your email address. So look forward to staying in touch. Look forward to coming back to the Valley in a few days. And thank you very much for participating in the San Fernando Valley Town Hall. Goodbye.